In the flickering candlelight of forgotten halls, where the scent of wilted roses clung to the air like a lover's regret, the Alpha King's daughter turned from every plate offered, her hunger a silent curse upon the eternal night. Ilara Voss, born under a blood moon in the shadowed valleys of the Carpathians 3 centuries past, carried the weight of her father's legacy like chains forged in silver and sorrow. At what appeared to be 25 in human years, her porcelain skin gleamed with an unnatural pallor, her eyes, storm gray flecked with crimson, holding the depth of endless winters. Daughter to King Thorn, the Alpha King whose rule spanned empires of night, Ilara was no mere princess. She was a dhampir, half vampire, half human echo, her blood a turbulent river between worlds. Abandoned by her mortal mother in infancy, who fled the castle's icy embrace fearing the child's hybrid thirst, Ilara grew amidst whispers of monstrosity. Her traumas etched deep, the ritual bite at adolescence that bound her to her father's court, amplifying her isolation, the lovers she outlived, their warmth fading to dust in her arms, and the gnawing guilt of her selective hunger, rejecting the lifeblood of her kind as tainted, craving something pure, untainted by eternity's rot. She desired connection, a tether to the fleeting human world that her immortality mocked, yet feared it would unravel her fragile control, pulling her into the abyss of full transformation or madness. The grand hall of Blackthorn Castle loomed that evening, its vaulted ceilings lost in gloom, tapestries of frayed velvet depicting ancient hunts where wolves and shadows merged. Rain lashed the leaded windows, a relentless drumbeat echoing the pulse Ilara no longer fully possessed. Servants, vampiric thralls with eyes like polished obsidian, glided forward, bearing silver platters laden with goblets of crimson nectar, drawn from the veins of willing donors in distant villages. The air thickened with the metallic tang, mingled with the earthy smoke of beeswax candles guttering in iron sconces. King Thorn presided at the head of the oaken table, his form a monolith of regal decay, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair like raven wings and a gaze that pierced souls. Immortal since the fall of Rome, he had chosen eternity not for power alone, but to atone for the legion he led to slaughter in forgotten wars, his ethics a solitary compass in the moral fog of undeath. Solitary now, marked by the guilt of outliving his queen, Ilara's mother, he ruled with a quiet ferocity, his court a refuge for the lost. Yet even he could not pierce his daughter's pall of refusal. "Ilara!" His voice rumbled like distant thunder, resonant yet laced with paternal ache. "You weaken yourself. The blood is fresh, offered in loyalty." She sat rigid, her gown of black lace whispering against the chair's carved arms, a single ruby pendant at her throat catching the candlelight like a drop of congealed fire. The platters came one by one, a thrall from the eastern woods, his essence spiced with pine, another from the southern seas, salty and wild. Ilara's lips parted, nostrils flaring at the allure, but revulsion twisted her features. She pushed them away, the goblets clattering softly, spilling rivulets that stained the white linens like accusations. Hunger clawed at her insides, a beast pacing its cage, but nothing satisfied. It was as if her dhampir nature rebelled, seeking not sustenance, but salvation, something born of mortality's fragile spark. The hall fell into murmurs, the vampire's eyes gleaming with curiosity and disdain. Thorn's fist tightened on his chalice, the gold filigree biting into his palm. He had seen empires crumble for less than a daughter's defiance, but this was no rebellion. It was despair incarnate. Then, from the periphery, a new figure entered, not a thrall, but a human waitress, summoned from the mortal villages below as a novelty, her presence a rare concession to Thorn's experiments in bridging worlds. Leora Kane, 28, hailed from the fog-shrouded moors of Ireland, her life a tapestry of quiet ruin. Orphaned young by a fever that claimed her family, she had wandered into service at the castle's gates 6 moons prior, drawn by rumors of coin enough to bury her debts and the illness that sapped her strength. A lingering cough, born of damp winters and unheeded grief. Disillusioned by lovers who fled her fading health, Leora sought only survival, her desires simple, a hearth of her own, a life unshadowed by loss. Yet beneath her weary hazel eyes and auburn hair, tied in a practical braid, burned a resilience, a moral compass unbent by hardship. She carried no illusions of grandeur, only the steady hands of one who had cooked for the dying. Leora approached with a wooden tray, steam rising from a modest bowl of stew, root vegetables simmered with herbs from the castle gardens, thickened with cream from mortal farms, and a loaf of dark bread still warm from the ovens. No blood, no ritual offering, just human fare, prepared in the kitchens where she toiled among ghosts. The scent wafted, earthy potatoes, sharp thyme, a whisper of garlic that cut through the hall's metallic haze. It was sustenance for the living, unadorned and honest. Ilara's gaze lifted, locking onto Leora's. For the first time that night, something shifted. A flicker in the Dampier's eyes, the crimson flecks softening to gray. The waitress placed the bowl before her, their fingers brushing in a fleeting contact that sent a shiver through Ilara, like moonlight piercing storm clouds. Leora met her stare without flinching, her voice soft but steady. "It's just stew, milady. Nothing more." The hall hushed. Ilara lifted the spoon, the silver cool against her skin, and brought it to her lips. The warmth bloomed on her tongue, simple, vital, alive. She ate, slowly at first, then with a hunger that surprised even her, the flavors grounding her in a way the blood never could. Tears pricked her eyes, unbidden, as memories surfaced, her mother's lullabies, the taste of bread shared in secret before abandonment. This was not rejection, it was revelation. Thorn watched, his expression unreadable, a mix of hope and wariness, etching deeper lines into his eternal face. Leora retreated to the shadows, wiping her hands on her apron, unaware that her simple act had cracked the facade of the night. But as Ilara set down the spoon, a cough escaped Leora's lips, harsh, wet, echoing in the silence. The human waitress pressed a hand to her chest, color draining from her cheeks. Ilara's senses sharpened. She smelled it now, the faint copper of illness in Leora's breath, the fragility beneath the strength. The Dampier's heart, that half-remembered organ, quickened. What if this warmth, this unexpected balm, came from one already slipping toward death's door? In the recesses of the hall, an ancient mirror hung crooked on the stone wall, its surface fogged by centuries, reflecting not just the feast, but fragments of souls, Ilara's fractured gaze meeting Leora's unwitting form. The mirror, a relic from Thorn's mortal days, would become their silent witness, capturing echoes of choices yet to unfold. As the candles burned low, Ilara rose, her voice a whisper that cut the air. "Who are you, that your hands weave life from nothing?" Leora turned, surprise widening her eyes, but before she could answer, a shadow stirred in the corridor beyond, a figure cloaked in night, watching. The Alpha King's court held secrets deeper than hunger, and this human's arrival had awakened them. The mist rolled in from the castle's battlements like a shroud woven from forgotten prayers, carrying the chill of mortality into the heart of immortality. Ilara lingered in the aftermath of the feast, the empty bowl before her a testament to an anomaly she could not dismiss. The hall emptied slowly, vampires dispersing like smoke, their footsteps muffled on the threadbare rugs. Thorn had retired to his chambers, his parting glance to his daughter heavy with unspoken questions. But Ilara's mind replayed the moment, the stew's warmth seeping into her veins, easing the perpetual ache that blood only inflamed. It was as if Leora's touch had infused the meal with something vital, a spark of the human world she had long forsaken. She wandered the corridors, the castle's stone walls cool and unyielding under her fingertips, veined with moss that glowed faintly in the moonlight, slanting through arrow-slit windows. Blackthorn was a labyrinth of ruins and opulence, crumbling arches from medieval sieges, restored salons lit by crystal chandeliers that tinkled like distant bells in the drafts. The air hummed with the low moan of wind through cracks, a symphony to Alara's heightened senses. Leora, meanwhile, retreated to the servants' quarters below, a warren of damp cells where humans like her ached out existence. She coughed again, the sound rattling in her chest like stones in a hollow vessel. At 28, her body betrayed her daily. The illness, diagnosed by village healers as consumption's shadow, sapped her vitality, leaving her breathless after simple tasks. Yet she pressed on, her desires rooted in the soil of her Irish homeland. To return one day, buy a cottage by the sea, and tend a garden that bloomed without fear of winter's grasp. Traumas lingered, the fever that stole her parents when she was 12, forcing her into orphanages and menial labor, a betrothed who abandoned her upon the first blood-flecked handkerchief. Disillusioned, she had answered the castle's call for help, lured by promises of pay that could fund a cure in the cities. Ethics guided her. She aided without judgment, even to the monsters whispered about in taverns. Little did she know, her path had intersected with eternity's air. Alara found her in the kitchens, a cavernous space dominated by a massive hearth where embers smoldered, casting ruddy light on copper pots and sacks of flour. Leora scrubbed a counter, her sleeves rolled up, revealing arms marked by faint scars from kitchen mishaps. The scent of herbs clung to her, rosemary and sage, mingling with the faint, underlying bitterness of her affliction. "You," Alara said, stepping into the light, her voice a silken thread. "The food. It sustained me when nothing else could." Leora straightened, wiping sweat from her brow, her hazel eyes wary but kind. "It's only what I know, milady. My ma taught me to cook with what the earth gives, no fancy spells or whatever you folk use." A half-smile tugged at her lips, diffusing the tension, but another cough followed, forcing her to lean against the table. Alara's gaze sharpened, drawn to the flush on Leora's cheeks, the labored rise of her chest. She approached, the distance between them charged, like the air before a storm. "You're ill," she murmured, not a question, but an observation, laced with a Dampir's innate perception. Her hand hovered near Leora's arm, hesitating. Touch was dangerous. It stirred hungers deeper than blood. Leora nodded, unashamed. "Aye, been that way a while. Doesn't stop me working. Besides, places like this pay better than scrubbing floors in Dublin." She met Alara's eyes, unflinching, sensing the vulnerability beneath the princess's regal poise. "Why does it matter to you?" The question hung, introspective waves crashing in Alara's mind. She had rejected the court's offerings for years, her Dampir nature a curse that amplified revulsion toward the vampiric taint. Yet this human's creation had bridged the chasm, awakening a philosophical quandary. Was her hunger for purity a rejection of her father's world, or a cry for the mortality she could never reclaim? The mirror from the hall echoed in her thoughts, its foggy surface a symbol of distorted self-perception, reflecting her internal war. "I am between worlds," Alara confessed, her voice dropping to a cadence that matched the hearth's crackle. "My blood wars within me. Your meal reminded me of what I've lost." She paused, the intimacy of the admission pulling her closer. The wind outside howled, rattling the shutters as if the castle itself mourned. Leora poured 2 mugs of herbal tea from a kettle, the steam curling like mist. "Worlds or no, everyone needs reminding sometimes. Sit. It's chamomile, calms the cough, or so they say." They sat at a scarred wooden table, the act mundane yet profound, the first unforced communion in Alara's endless nights. As they spoke, Leora sharing tales of Irish mists and stubborn blooms, Alara revealing fragments of her isolation, the bond flickered, resisted. Alara rationalized it as curiosity, nothing more. Love, if it dared emerge, would be a curse, dooming the fragile human before her. Yet inevitability whispered in the steam, in the way Leora's laughter lit the gloom. Suddenly a shadow fell across the doorway. A courtier, one of Thorn's spies, his eyes narrowed. "Princess, your father summons. Matters of the blood moon ritual approach." The word ritual hung heavy, evoking the choice Alara dreaded, a ceremony to fully embrace her vampiric side or risk fading into shadow. Alara rose, her hand brushing Leora's in farewell, a spark that lingered. But as she departed, Leora's cough deepened, blood flecking her palm. She stared at it, the metallic scent mingling with the tea's calm, wondering if the castle's shadows had already claimed her. Upstairs, Alara felt it too, a pull toward the human, and the death that shadowed them both, invisible but ever present. In the mirror of her chambers later, Alara saw not just her face, but Leora's reflection superimposed, fractured and calling. What choice would the ritual demand, when humanity's warmth tempted her from the edge? Candle flames danced like captive souls in the draught, their golden tears pooling on the altar where choices were forged in fire and fang. The blood moon hung low over Blackthorn, its crimson glow seeping through the chapel's stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in hues of garnet and shadow. This was the heart of the ritual chamber, a sanctum untouched by time, where Thorn had first bound Alara to her destiny. The air was thick with incense, myrrh and sandalwood, its smoke curling around an ancient altar carved from obsidian, etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. Alara stood before it, her black gown pooling like ink, the ruby pendant at her throat warm against her skin. Doubt gnawed at her, sharper than any thirst. The ritual, performed every century under the blood moon, demanded a choice: embrace full immortality, drinking from the Alpha King's vein to seal her Dhampir limbo, or reject it, risking dissolution into a half-life of torment. Her traumas resurfaced, the abandonment, the outlived loves, fueling her resistance. She desired balance, not the eternity that isolated her father, whose guilt over past conquests made him a king of ghosts. Thorn entered, his presence commanding yet solitary, the weight of his immortality evident in the subtle slump of his shoulders. "Daughter," he said, his voice a gravelly timbre that echoed off the vaulted arches. "The moon calls, your hunger grows, the human's fare is but a fleeting balm." Alara's mind wandered to Leora, who even now toiled in the kitchens, her cough a persistent shadow. The waitress's stories from the night before lingered, tales of seaside cliffs where waves crashed like defiant hearts, of a faith in small miracles amid despair. Their conversations had deepened, Leora sharing her disillusionment with a world that discarded the broken, Alara confessing the ethical solitude of her kind, vampires who chose not to die, yet lived haunted by the lives they took. The love budding between them was resisted. Alara rationalized it as pity, Leora as duty, yet it pulled, inevitable as the tide. Below, Leora prepared a simple meal for the servants, her hands trembling from fatigue. The illness clawed deeper, pain blooming in her chest with each breath. She desired escape, to heal, to love without the specter of death. But the castle's allure, embodied in Alara's gaze, complicated her resolve. A moral dilemma stirred. Was serving these immortals a betrayal of her humanity, or a path to redemption? The ritual began with a chant, Thorn's words in an ancient tongue resonating like thunder in her bones. He extended his wrist, the skin parting under his own fang, dark blood welling, rich, potent, the essence of the Alpha King. Drink, Alara, choose life eternal, or fade. She hesitated, the scent intoxicating, promising power. But visions assailed her. Leora's warm hands, the stew's earthy comfort, the mirror's fractured reflection showing a life intertwined. The choice crystallized, not between death and eternity, but between isolation and connection. With a cry, she pushed Thorn away, the blood splattering the altar like forbidden rain. Thorn's eyes widened, shock mingling with understanding. "You choose the half-light? For what?" "For something human," she whispered, fleeing the chapel as the moon peaked, its light fracturing in the windows like shattered vows. She found Leora in the herb garden, under the moon's bloody gaze, the waitress kneeling to gather night-blooming jasmine, its petals white as fresh snow against the dark soil. The air was alive with cricket song and the distant hoot of owls, textures of night pressing in. Leora looked up, surprise softening to concern. "Milady." "The ritual." Ilara knelt beside her, grasping her hand, feeling the feverish heat. "I refused it. For this." Their lips met in a tentative kiss, born of desperation and dawning affection. Sensual, tragic, the taste of jasmine and blood mingling. It was redemption's first breath, yet cursed by Leora's fragility. But as they parted, a figure emerged from the mist, a rival courtier, eyes gleaming with malice, whispering of betrayal. "The king will not forgive this defiance, Dampier. And your human pet? She reeks of death already." Ilara pulled Leora close, the jasmine crushed between them, its scent a poignant symbol of fleeting beauty. The cough returned, violent, staining Leora's lips red. In that moment, death loomed visible, a silent character demanding its toll. Would Ilara's choice save them, or doom them to shadows? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. Moonlight splintered in the ancient mirror, casting shards of silver that danced like memories too sharp to hold. Ilara and Leora retreated to the Dampier's private chambers, a sanctuary high in the castle's eastern tower, where tapestries of faded silk depicted lovers entwined in eternal embrace. The room smelled of aged wood and lavender sachets, the fire in the grate crackling softly, its warmth a counterpoint to the chill seeping through the stone. The mirror dominated one wall, a towering antique with a frame of twisted vines, its surface rippled as if breathing secrets. Leora's cough had worsened since the garden, each rasp a knife to Ilara's composure. The human sat on the edge of the four-poster bed, her auburn hair unbound, falling in waves that caught the firelight. At 28, her body was a battlefield. The illness etched hollows under her eyes, yet her spirit burned bright, desires for a simple life now tangled with this forbidden pull. Traumas resurfaced in quiet moments, the loss of her family, the abandonment that taught her self-reliance. But Ilara's presence stirred hope, a moral anchor urging her to fight. Ilara paced, her gown trailing like a shadow, the ruby pendant swaying. Rejecting the ritual had consequences. Thorn's court buzzed with dissent, whispers of her human weakness threatening exile or worse. Her own traumas amplified the fear. The bite that marked her Dampier fate, the guilt of desiring mortality's warmth. "This cannot last," she said, voice laced with philosophical sorrow. "My world devours yours." Leora reached for her, fingers intertwining, the touch electric, skin against skin, textures of velvet and callus. "Then let it devour slowly. I've nothing left to lose but this." Their embrace deepened, bodies pressing in the fire's glow, sensual exploration born of resisted longing. Ilara's lips traced Leora's neck, not to bite but to savor the pulse, alive and fleeting. It was intimate, tragic, the air heavy with the scent of sweat and smoke. Yet doubt intruded. Ilara pulled back, gazing into the mirror. There, their reflections merged. Ilara's ethereal form overlaying Leora's mortal one, fractured lines suggesting the chasm between. The mirror, symbol of their distorted union, whispered of memory and forgetting. Ilara's endless recollections clashing with Leora's fragile now. Downstairs, Thorn brooded in his study, maps of ancient territories spread before him. His immortality, chosen in a battlefield's despair to redeem slain comrades, now felt like a curse. Guilt over Ilara's defiance warred with pride. He had been solitary too long, ethical isolation his penance. A knock, the malicious courtier, reporting the princess's indiscretion. She consorts with the human, sire. It weakens us all. Thorn's fist clenched, but compassion stirred. Leave her. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die. Perhaps she chooses life anew. In the tower, revelation struck as Leora collapsed in a fit of coughing, blood staining the sheets. Ilara cradled her, panic rising. "I can save you," she whispered, fangs grazing her own wrist. The choice loomed. Share her blood, risking Leora's transformation into something hybrid, or let death claim her. Leora, eyes fever-bright, shook her head. "Not like this. Let me choose my end." The dilemma ethical, tearing at Ilara's soul, love as redemption or curse. A distant howl pierced the night, wolves circling the castle grounds. The courtier's threat materialized, guards at the door, demanding Ilara's return. As Leora slipped into uneasy sleep, Ilara stared into the mirror, seeing death's silhouette behind them. What price for this light in the shadows? The wind howled through the castle's veins, carrying the scent of impending storm and the faint, metallic promise of blood not yet spilled. Dawn crept reluctantly over Blackthorn, its pale light filtering through heavy drapes in Ilara's chambers, where Leora lay pale and restless on the bed. The fire had died to embers, leaving the room in a hush broken only by the human's shallow breaths. Ilara sat vigil, her hand clasping Leora's, the warmth fading like a receding tide. The mirror across the room reflected their tableau. Ilara's vigilant form, Leora's fragile one, the ruby pendant glinting like a warning. Thorn's summons had come at midnight, the guards retreating under his order, but the rift deepened. Ilara's rejection of the ritual painted her as a threat to the court's purity, her bond with a human seen as dilution. Her desires clashed, to protect Leora, to cling to this taste of redemption, yet guilt marked her, echoing her father's solitary ethics. Leora stirred, eyes opening to the dim light. "It hurts less when you're near," she murmured, her Irish lilt softened by pain. At 28, her traumas, family's fever, lover's flight, had hardened her, but Ilara's compassion cracked the shell. She desired not eternity, but moments, shared breaths, the texture of silk sheets against fevered skin. They talked in whispers, the conversation introspective, weaving philosophy into intimacy. "Death is always there," Ilara said, tracing Leora's palm, feeling the faint scars, invisible, waiting. "But you make me see it as choice, not chain." Leora nodded, her hand guiding Ilara's to her chest, where the heart beat erratically. Their kiss was slow, cadenced, bodies entwining with sensual grace. No vulgarity, only the poetic ache of light meeting shadow. The air textured with the salt of tears, the velvet of skin, the distant patter of rain. But action intruded. A commotion below, the malicious courtier rallying dissenters, accusing Ilara of heresy. Thorn intervened, his voice booming through the halls, ethical solitude fracturing as he defended his daughter. "She seeks what I once lost, humanity's fire." In the chambers, Leora's condition plummeted, delirium set in, visions of Irish moors blending with castle shadows. Ilara, desperate, fetched a vial of her own blood, Dampier essence, potent yet unstable. "Drink," she urged, the moment a ritual of choice. Leora hesitated, moral dilemma flashing. Accept partial immortality or embrace true death? She drank, a single sip, the liquid burning like liquid fire. Transformation flickered, color returning to her cheeks, cough easing, but at a cost. Visions of eternity assaulted her, glimpses of Alara's traumas, the weight of immortality. The courtier's plot escalated. He burst into the tower, fangs bared, intent on dragging Alara to judgment. Thorn arrived in time, a clash of shadows ensuing, fists and fangs in the corridor, the Alpha King's strength prevailing. But as peace settled, Leora whispered, "What have I become?" Her eyes, now flecked with gray, reflected the mirror's truth, a bridge between worlds, yet teetering. Alara held her, the rain intensifying outside, washing the windows like tears. The symbolic mirror captured it all, reflections merging, but shadows lengthening. Death retreated, but the curse of their union deepened. Love's redemption now laced with the fear of losing oneself. Roses wilted in the vase by the window, their petals curling like fingers reaching for a light forever out of grasp. Weeks blurred in Blackthorn's timeless grip, the blood moon's aftermath leaving Alara and Leora in a fragile idyll. The tower chambers became their haven, sunlight muted by thick curtains. The air scented with healing herbs Leora insisted on brewing. Chamomile and willow bark, their steam a soothing veil. The mirror watched, its surface clearer now, reflecting not fracture but tentative unity. Leora's transformation from the Dhampir blood was subtle, her cough subdued, strength returning, but at 28's edge she felt the shift. Senses sharpening, a faint thirst awakening. Traumas evolved, the illness's shadow lifted, but new fears bloomed, outliving her past, becoming like the immortals she served. Her desires sharpened, to explore this bond, to choose life with Alara. Yet ethics questioned the cost. "Am I still me?" she asked often, voice a whisper against Alara's neck. Alara, too, transformed. The ritual's rejection had solidified her path, her Dhampir nature stabilizing through Leora's presence. No longer solitary, her guilt eased, replaced by redemptive love, resisted at first as folly, now inevitable. They shared nights of introspective passion, bodies entwined by firelight, textures of silk and skin, sounds of slow breaths and rain on stone, sensual, poetic, the intimacy a dance between light and shadow, where touch healed old wounds. Thorn observed from afar, his ethical isolation cracking. Marked by centuries of guilt, wars where he chose eternity to atone, he saw in them a mirror of his lost queen. He granted sanctuary, quelling the courtier's faction with quiet authority, but warned, love redeems, yet curses, the shadows hunger. Action stirred when Leora ventured to the kitchens, her renewed vigor drawing stares. The malicious courtier, exiled but vengeful, returned under cover of night, slipping a poisoned draught into the herb stores, aimed at weakening the human interloper. Leora, brewing tea, ingested a trace. Symptoms mimicked her old illness, collapsing her in the garden. Alara found her, panic surging. The revelation, a note from the courtier, demanding Alara submit to a forced ritual or watch Leora fade. Choice loomed. Sacrifice her freedom for love or fight, risking all. In the chapel, confrontation unfolded. Thorn confronting the traitor, a ritual of justice where the courtier's immortality was revoked, his form crumbling to dust under the Alpha King's decree. Alara, cradling Leora, administered more of her blood, the bond deepening, crimson threads weaving their fates. As Leora recovered, eyes meeting Alara's in the moonlight, the wilted roses on the sill perked faintly, petals unfurling. But the mirror showed a new fracture. Leora's reflection held a subtle crimson glint. Death, ever present, had been cheated again, but eternity's door creaked open. Would their love endure the pull? If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts. Snow fell softly outside the tower, blanketing the world in white silence, each flake a frozen tear from the heavens. Winter gripped Blackthorn, transforming the castle into a fortress of ice and memory. Elara and Leora's chambers glowed with candlelight, the hearth roaring against the frost, etching patterns on the windows. The mirror, dusted with rime, reflected their evolving forms. Elara's grace undiminished, Leora's now carrying an ethereal edge from the Dhampir blood. Her skin luminous, movements fluid. Leora's change deepened. At what felt like 29, her illness vanquished, but immortality's whisper grew. Traumas shifted, the fear of loss inverted to dread of endless solitude, yet desires flourished. To wander the world with Elara, to embrace this cursed redemption. Ethics bound her. She rationalized the bond as fate, resisting full surrender until inevitable. Elara felt the pull, too, her Dhampir limbo easing into something hybrid. Love's light illuminating shadows. Philosophical musings filled their days, discussions by the fire on memory's burden, faith in love's transcendence. Intimacy wove through, slow caresses tracing scars, the texture of fur blankets and warm breath, sensual without excess, a symphony of heartbeats syncing. Thorn, ever the solitary king, invited them to his study, a room of leather-bound tomes and flickering lamps. His guilt, etched from ancient choices, softened. "You remind me of what I forsook," he confessed, revealing a portrait of his queen, Elara's mother, Leora's mirror in hazel eyes. The revelation bonded them. Thorn offered guidance, his ethics a beacon. But suspense brewed. Whispers from the outer villages reached the castle, hunters, mortals aware of the monsters within, drawn by tales of the courtier's dust. Led by a zealot, scarred by vampiric raids, they besieged the gates under cover of blizzard, arrows whistling through the snow. Action erupted. Elara and Leora, armed with Thorn's relics, silver daggers etched with runes, defended the battlements. The fight was visceral, snow crunching underfoot, blood steaming in the cold, the wind carrying cries. Leora, her new strength shining, saved Elara from an arrow, the wound superficial but symbolic. In the aftermath, as hunters fled, Leora confronted her choice. The blood's gift had saved her, but at what cost? "I feel it calling," she said, staring into the mirror, where her reflection showed fangs subtly elongating. Elara held her, snow melting on their skin. The white blanket outside symbolized purity amid suffering, but death's shadow lingered in the hunter's threat. Thorn, wounded but resolute, vowed protection. Yet the dilemma persisted: embrace eternity together or cling to fading humanity. Velvet curtains billowed in the gale, revealing glimpses of a sky bruised with twilight's sorrow, where stars flickered like the last breaths of forgotten dreams. Spring had thawed the iron grip of winter on Blackthorn Castle, infusing the air with the tentative perfume of rebirth. Wild hyacinths and damp earth pushing through the snowmelt in the overgrown gardens below the towers. Vines, once brittle with frost, now climbed the weathered stone walls like insistent lovers, their tendrils weaving through cracks that whispered of centuries past. In the sanctuary of Elara's chambers, high in the eastern turret, the world outside seemed a distant murmur, supplanted by the intimate rhythm of shared existence. The room, with its four-poster bed draped in faded brocade and walls lined with shelves of leather-bound tomes gathering dust, had become a cocoon for Elara and Leora, a fragile bastion against the encroaching shadows of their intertwined fates. Elara Voss, the Dhampir princess, moved with a grace that belied the turmoil churning within her eternal soul. 3 centuries of life had etched lines of quiet wisdom into her features, though her appearance remained locked in the bloom of 25, porcelain skin luminous under the soft glow of beeswax candles, storm-gray eyes flecked with the persistent crimson of her vampiric heritage. Born in the shadowed Carpathian valleys under a blood moon, she was the daughter of King Thorn, the Alpha King whose immortality spanned the rise and fall of empires. Her traumas were a tapestry of abandonment and isolation. Her mortal mother's flight in the dead of night, leaving an infant Alara to the cold mercy of the vampire court. The adolescent ritual bite that amplified her hybrid thirst, turning sustenance into a moral battlefield, and the parade of lovers, human and immortal alike, whose warmth she had clung to only to watch them wither into dust. Her desires, once a desperate yearning for the mortality she could never fully reclaim, had evolved through Leora's presence into something deeper, a longing for balanced eternity, where love served as both anchor and compass, guiding her through the ethical solitude that had defined her existence. Leora Kane, the human waitress who had upended Alara's world, now navigated the precipice of her own transformation. At 28 in mortal years, but feeling the inexorable shift toward something timeless, her auburn hair cascaded in loose waves down her back, framing hazel eyes that held a newfound depth, flecked now with subtle gray, echoes of the Dhampir blood she had ingested. Hailing from the fog-shrouded moors of Ireland, Leora's life had been a relentless forge of hardship. Orphaned at 12 by a fever that swept through her village like a vengeful specter, claiming her parents in a haze of delirium and loss. A string of menial labors in Dublin's underbelly, where she learned to cook not just for survival, but as an act of quiet defiance against despair. And the betrayal of a betrothed who vanished upon discovering the first flecks of blood in her handkerchief, abandoning her to the creeping illness that had drawn her to Blackthorn's gates 6 moons prior. Her traumas had armored her with resilience, but the Dhampir essence now stirred a profound existential dread, the fear of outliving the simple desires that had sustained her. A modest cottage by the sea, hands buried in soil to coax life from the earth, and a love untainted by the curse of endless nights. Ethics still bound her tightly. She rationalized this bond as a borrowed grace, resisting full surrender to the changes rippling through her veins, even as passion eroded the walls she had so carefully built. Their love had blossomed into a profound tapestry, woven from shared silences and fervent whispers that bridged the chasm between mortal fragility and immortal endurance. In the candlelit hush of the chamber, they moved together with a cadenced intimacy that was as much ritual as revelation, bodies entwining on the rumpled sheets, the textures of silk against fever-warmed skin contrasting with the calloused palms of Leora's hands tracing the smooth planes of Alara's back. The air grew heavy with the sensual poetry of their union, the slow, deliberate brush of lips along collarbones, eliciting sighs that mingled with the distant rumble of thunder rolling in from the horizon, the velvet slide of limbs, where Alara's cool touch ignited sparks in Leora's evolving warmth, the faint, underlying scent of night-blooming jasmine that Leora had gathered from the garden, now crushed between them like a talisman of fleeting beauty. It was no vulgar indulgence, but a tragic dance, love's light piercing the shadows of their respective despairs, each caress a philosophical affirmation of redemption amid suffering. Alara's fingers lingered on the faint scars marking Leora's arms, remnants of kitchen mishaps and harder lives, while Leora's breath ghosted over the ruby pendant at Alara's throat, its deep red glow mirroring the blood that now coursed, subtly altered through both their veins. King Thorn, the Alpha King whose rule was a monument to solitary atonement, observed their evolving bond from the periphery of his own shadowed existence. Immortal since the chaotic fall of Rome, where as a general he had led legions to slaughter only to choose undeath as penance for the souls he could not save, Thorn carried the weight of guilt like an invisible crown. Tall and broad, with raven hair streaked by time's indifferent hand and eyes that pierced like forged steel, he had ruled Blackthorn with an ethical ferocity, sparing the innocent, fostering a court of the lost rather than conquerors. His solitude had been absolute, marked by the ghost of his queen, Alara's mother, whose mortal warmth he had mourned for centuries. Yet, in his daughter and her human companion, he glimpsed a mirror to his own forsaken humanity. One evening, as twilight bled into the study, a cavernous room lined with maps of ancient territories and flickering oil lamps, he summoned them. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather and pipe smoke, the fire in the grate casting elongated shadows that danced like wary specters. "You remind me of what I forsook in the name of eternity," Thorn confessed, his voice a gravelly timbre that resonated with the crackle of burning logs. He rose from his high-backed chair, retrieving a small amulet from a locked drawer, an intricate piece of gold wrought with intertwined roses, their petals etched in exquisite detail, symbolizing the thorny beauty of enduring love. "This was hers," he said, placing it in Alara's palm, the metal warm from his touch. "Wear it, and let it bind what I could not." The gesture was more than a gift. It was a philosophical concession, an acknowledgement that redemption could bloom even in the damned, transforming his ethical isolation into quiet alliance. But suspense brewed beneath the surface, calm, insidious as the mist rising from the thawing moors. Leora, emboldened by her strengthening form, ventured into the castle's lower levels during the day, her steps lighter, senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the air, the metallic tang of distant blood stores, the earthy whisper of roots burrowing in the cellars. Whispers followed her, courtiers with narrowed eyes, their disdain for the mortal taint now laced with fear of her inexplicable vitality. In the quiet of her dreams, visions plagued her, a shadowed ritual chamber where death manifested as a cloaked figure, scythe in hand, offering a final irrevocable choice between the life she remembered and the eternity beckoning. She awoke in Alara's arms, sweat dampened and trembling, the sheets tangled like threads of fate. "I saw it," Leora murmured, her Irish lilt laced with dread. "A crossroads where all paths lead to shadow. Is this what you live with? The constant pull of what was and what might devour you?" Alara held her close, the amulet's roses pressing into her skin like a vow. "It's the beauty of suffering made manifest," she replied, her voice a poetic caress. "But together we weave the threads anew." Their conversation deepened into the night, a philosophical exploration of memory's chains, how Ilara's endless recollections burdened her like anchors, while Leora's fragile past now stretched toward infinity, threatening to unravel her sense of self. Faith flickered against despair. They spoke of light in the shadows, of love as the ultimate transcendence, even as the wind howled outside, rattling the leaded windows like an impatient harbinger. Action erupted with the fury of a long-suppressed storm. Remnants of the mortal hunters, those zealots scarred by ancient vampiric raids, had not been quelled by winter's defeat. Emboldened by spring's renewal, they allied with a rogue faction of vampires, disaffected exiles resentful of Thorn's merciful rule, who viewed Alara's bond with Leora as a dilution of their eternal purity. Under a moonless sky, they infiltrated the castle through forgotten tunnels beneath the gardens, their approach masked by the gale's roar. The great hall, usually a place of somber feasts, became a battlefield, long oaken tables overturned with crashes that echoed like thunder, candelabras toppling to spill molten wax across the flagstones, the air thickening with the acrid smoke of extinguished flames and the coppery reek of spilled blood. Ilara sensed the intrusion first, her Dhampir instincts flaring like a warning ember. She and Leora raced downward, the amulet bouncing against Ilara's chest, its roses a talisman against the chaos. The clash was visceral, a symphony of supernatural suspense, steel clanging against fangs, the wet rip of flesh under claws, grunts and cries mingling with the relentless patter of rain now sheeting against the walls. A hunter, broad-shouldered and wild-eyed, lunged at Leora with a silver-tipped blade, his face twisted in fanatic zeal. But Leora, her latent power surging. Moved with unnatural speed, eyes flashing a momentary crimson, hands gripping the assailant's wrist with a strength born of her hybrid blood. She twisted, the blade clattering away, and drove her elbow into his throat, felling him with a guttural choke. Alara fought beside her, a whirlwind of lace and fury, her fangs bared as she dispatched a rogue vampire, the creature's dust scattering like ash in the wind. Thorn arrived like a tempest, his form a monolith amid the fray, ethical resolve hardening into protective wrath. He sealed the breach with a roar that shook the rafters, ancient runes on the doors glowing under his command, trapping the intruders. But victory came at a cost. A deep gash across his side from a hunter's arrow, the wound slow to knit even for an Alpha King, blood, dark and potent, seeping through his tunic. Alara tended him in the aftermath, her hands steady as she bound the injury in the study, the air now heavy with the scent of iron and herbs. "You've given us a legacy of choice," she whispered, and Thorn, pain etching his features, nodded faintly. "And you have redeemed it." In the quiet that followed, as dawn's first light pierced the storm clouds, Leora confronted the inevitable. Kneeling before Ilara in the chapel's alcove, the stained glass windows casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the stone, she made her choice. "No more resistance," she said, voice resolute yet trembling. Ilara extended her wrist, fangs piercing her own skin with a hiss, the dark blood welling like liquid midnight. Leora drank deeper this time, the essence burning through her like rivers of fire, textures of searing heat in her veins, visions assaulting her mind. Flashes of Alara's traumas, the Carpathian nights, the weight of immortality's solitude. The transformation was profound, her body arching in agony and ecstasy, senses exploding into clarity, the distant drip of water in the walls, the subtle pulse of life in the earth below. As the rite concluded, Leora rose, her eyes now fully flecked with gray, a dhampir in truth. The amulet's roses, clutched in her hand, seemed to bloom faintly, petals warming under her touch, a symbol of their unbreakable bond. They embraced amid the chapel's hush, the textures of their union renewed. Ilara's cool embrace against Leora's newfound vitality, the sensual poetry of lips meeting in grateful surrender. Death, the invisible companion, had been cheated once more, its cloak retreating into the shadows. Yet the curse whispered in the quiet. Immortality's beauty veiled the sharp edge of suffering. The philosophical quandary of lives extended but forever altered. Thorn, recovering in his chambers, summoned them one final time, his wound bandaged, but his gaze steady. "You've chosen well, weaving fate's threads into something enduring." He smiled faintly, the lines of guilt softening for the first time in centuries. But as they departed, a distant rumble echoed from the valley, a harbinger of greater storms, external forces sensing the castle's subtle vulnerability, drawn by the ripples of their defiant love. In the mirror awaiting them in the tower, their reflections stood whole, intertwined, but shadows lengthened at the edges, promising trials yet to unfold. In the hush of pre-dawn, a single candle burned on the windowsill, its flame a defiant spark against the encroaching dark, whispering of choices that echo beyond the grave and into the soul's uncharted depths. Summer had draped Blackthorn Castle in a verdant shroud of mystery, the once barren grounds now alive with the lush tangle of ivy and wild roses climbing the ancient towers, their thorns a poignant reminder of beauty's inherent peril. The air hummed with the symphony of cicadas and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze, carrying the heady scent of night jasmine that bloomed only under the moon's watchful eye. A fragrance that evoked Leora's first gift to Ilara, gathered in the herb garden moons ago. In the heart of the eastern turret, Ilara and Leora's chambers had transformed into a living testament to their journey. Shelves now lined not just with dusty tomes, but with small tokens of their shared life. dried herbs bundled with ribbon, a carved wooden bowl from Leora's Irish kin. The air perpetually scented with the earthy warmth of chamomile teas brewed in moments of quiet reflection. The ancient mirror, polished to a mirror-like sheen and hung as the room's silent sentinel, captured it all. Reflections that had evolved from fractured distortions to a profound fusion. Two souls oscillating in harmonious tension between the blinding light of redemption and the enveloping shadows of eternal curse. Alara Voss stood before the window, her silhouette framed by the candle's glow, the ruby pendant at her throat catching the light like a captured drop of sunset blood. 3 centuries of existence had honed her into a being of profound depth. Her porcelain features ageless, storm-gray eyes now softened by the crimson flecks that danced like embers in a dying fire. As the Dampier daughter of the Alpha King, her traumas had been the forge of her character, the visceral sting of her mother's abandonment under that fateful blood moon, leaving her to navigate the vampire court's labyrinth of intrigue alone. The ritual bite of adolescence that bound her hybrid blood in chains of perpetual hunger and moral ambiguity. The hollow ache of outliving lovers whose mortal warmth had briefly illuminated her isolation, only to fade into memories that haunted her like ghosts. Yet through Leora, her desires had crystallized, not the futile grasp for lost mortality, but a vision of eternity balanced on the edge of love's blade, where ethical solitude yielded to compassionate alliance, transforming suffering into a redemptive force that illuminated even the darkest recesses of the soul. Leora Kane, once a fragile mortal waitress, now embodied the bridge between worlds. Her transformation into full Dampier essence, a culmination of resisted inevitability. Appearing eternally in the vigor of her late 20s, her auburn hair flowed like a cascade of autumn leaves, framing hazel eyes that gleamed with an otherworldly luminescence, gray flecks intertwining with her natural warmth, a visual echo of the blood that had rewritten her fate. From the mist-veiled moors of Ireland, her life had been a relentless odyssey of loss, the fever that claimed her parents at 12, plunging her into the cold indifference of orphanages and the grind of Dublin's streets, the disillusionment of a lover's flight upon witnessing her illness's cruel advance, teaching her that trust was a luxury afforded only to the unbroken, the quiet desperation that led her to Blackthorn's gates, seeking coin for a cure that never came. Those traumas, once chains of despair, had transmuted through Alara's gift into sources of unyielding strength, though they birthed new philosophical torments, the dread of endless solitude stretching before her, the ethical weight of outliving the human world she had cherished. Her desires, simple in their inception, a hearth by the sea, hands in the soil, love unshadowed by death, had expanded to encompass this transcendent bond, to wander eternity's vast tapestry with Alara, embracing love as both salvation and subtle curse, where faith in redemption warred with the despair of forgotten memories. Their days unfolded in a seamless blend of action and introspection, a cadenced rhythm that mirrored the philosophical heartbeat of their union. Mornings found them in the sun-dappled woods encircling the castle, where shafts of light pierced the canopy like divine fingers, illuminating paths worn by centuries of nocturnal wanderings. They walked hand in hand, the textures of the forest alive underfoot, moss soft as whispered secrets, bark rough with the scars of storms, the air alive with the trill of birdsong and the distant murmur of a brook carving its eternal course. Conversations flowed like the water itself, delving into the recesses of existence. Alara recounting the burdensome weight of memory, how each century layered like sediment, preserving joys and sorrows in crystalline clarity. Leora pondering the fragility of forgetting, her human past now a poignant echo that lent urgency to their present. Faith and despair intertwined in their discourse, faith in love's power to resurrect the damned, despair at the beauty inherent in human suffering, a transient blaze that immortals could only envy from afar. Intimacy crowned their nights in moonlit clearings, where the world fell away to reveal the poetic sensuality of their bond. Beneath a canopy of stars, bodies entwined on a bed of dew-kissed moss, the textures wove a tapestry of redemption. The cool silk of Ilara's skin against Leora's vital warmth, fingers tracing the subtle curves and scars that mapped their shared history. The slow, deliberate press of lips along jawlines and throats, eliciting breaths that harmonized with the wind's sigh through ancient oaks. The underlying scent of jasmine mingling with the earthy musk of the forest floor, a sensual tragedy where each touch affirmed the inevitability of their love. Resisted once as folly, now embraced as the light that pierced their shadows. It was a dance of light and dark, where heartbeats, once disparate, synced in defiant rhythm, the act not of conquest, but of mutual unveiling, transforming the curse of eternity into a chosen transcendence. King Thorn, the Alpha King whose immortality was a testament to solitary redemption, had found in their union a balm for his ancient wounds. Healed from the spring skirmish, his broad frame moved with renewed purpose through the castle's halls. The lines of guilt etched by Roman battlefields and lost queens softening into something akin to peace. In the grand study, amid the glow of oil lamps and the scent of polished oak, he gathered them one final evening. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, he intoned, his voice resonant with the weight of epochs, passing the symbolic mantle of Alpha to Ilara with a nod that spoke of abdicated burdens. His ethical rule, once a lonely vigil, now extended to quiet alliance, his solitude fracturing like ice under spring's sun. Yet the final threat loomed, insidious as the gathering clouds on the horizon, a seer from the mortal realms, a wizened figure cloaked in raven feathers, whose visions foretold a cataclysmic uprising. Shadows rising from forgotten crypts, a coalition of rogue immortals and fanatical hunters intent on purging the impure bonds like theirs. The air grew taut with supernatural suspense, the castle's stones seeming to hum with anticipation. In the chapel under a harvest moon, its crimson light filtering through stained glass to paint the obsidian altar in hues of blood and gold, revelation struck like lightning. The seer's prophecy crystallized into a collective choice. Unite the fractured courts of night or face oblivion's maw. Ilara and Leora led the ritual, not of fangs and veins, but of solemn vow, gathering loyalists in the vaulted space. The amulet of intertwined roses held aloft as they bound allies with oaths whispered in ancient tongues. The air thickened with incense, myrrh heavy as regret, sandalwood sharp as resolve, the flames of surrounding candles guttering as if breathing the weight of their pact. Climax unfolded in the valley beyond Blackthorn, a maelstrom of chaos under storm-lashed skies. Lightning cracking like the whip of vengeful gods, illuminating clashes of fang against blade, shadow against fire. Hunters swarmed with silver-tipped arrows whistling through the rain, rogue vampires lunging with eyes ablaze in feral hunger, the ground churning to mud under the press of boots and claws. Ilara fought at the vanguard, her movements a blur of lethal elegance, the ruby pendant swinging like a pendulum of fate. Leora, empowered by her Dhampir vitality, turned the tide with a mercy born of her human remnant, disarming a hunter with a twist that spared his life, her voice cutting through the din. Choose light, not endless night. Thorn, at their side, wielded his authority like a thunderbolt, his wounds reopening but his resolve unyielding, felling foes with strikes that echoed his battlefield past. Death hovered palpably, the invisible character claiming the unworthy, rogues crumbling to dust, hunters falling in crimson pools, but sparing the protagonists, its scythe glancing off their bonded light. In the resolution, as dawn gilded the battlefield's ruins with tentative gold, Ilara and Leora stood hand in hand before the chapel's altar, the mirror from their chambers brought forth to witness the dawn. Their reflections gleamed eternal and whole, intertwined in unbreakable symmetry, the amulet's roses blooming vibrantly in the light, a symbol of light forged in shadows. The single candle from the windowsill, carried through the fray, burned steadily between them, its flame unquenched, embodying the defiant spark of their choices. Love had redeemed the damned, the curse transmuted into chosen grace. Transformation complete, they affirmed their path. Eternity not as isolation, but as shared transcendence. Thorn, leaning on a makeshift staff but smiling with rare warmth, clasped their shoulders. You found the beauty in suffering, and in it, true life. Yet in the profound quiet that followed, as the first birdsong pierced the air, a soft cough echoed from Leora's lips, a faint remnant of her mortal echo, a whisper of the illness long vanquished but never fully erased. Death, the eternal companion, waited patiently in the periphery, its presence a subtle reminder that even immortals danced on the edge. Would eternity's embrace hold firm against the deeper nights ahead, or would it pull them into revelations yet untold? Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned.